Alright, so people, we have just had Pat Brown versus Vasil Ducar. Pat Brown stops Ducar in the 8th round to secure, in my opinion, what is a very impressive victory in what was a bit of a step up in his career. He was coming off a decent little win against Felix Ferreira, and now beats Vasil Ducar, being the first man to really stop Ducar. He was the first man to probably put Ducar down. Ducar's been there with the likes of, Chev Clark, Chris Billum Smith, Jordan Thompson, Mike Perez, who was the only man to stop him, but that was a corner stoppage. Other than that, he has not been stopped. I do not believe he's been on the ground. He was on the ground 3 times in this fight against Pat Brown. I did think the stoppage in general was a little bit early, but I do feel like Pat Brown was way on his way to securing, a conclusive stoppage victory. And honestly, the referee probably saved Ducar from a pretty brutal knockout. But yeah, I've shown no hesitation in my praise for Pat Brown. I watched him as an amateur. He was, of course, an Olympian. Thought he was a very good amateur. He turned over last year, in March of last year, actually. That fight went 4 rounds. I didn't think it was the most impressive professional debut in the performance. I thought he got hit too much, and I thought he was drew into too much of a slugfest. And I felt like if he kept behind his boxing, he would have secured a lot more of an impressive victory in my eyes. But it was good to see a young fighter make his debut against an ambitious opponent. And it was decent experience at the end of the day. From there, he's been virtually perfect in his career. No fight's gone past 2 rounds, and they've all been impressive. KO victories, in my opinion, highlight reel victories. And this fight was probably the most impressive victory. He got some rounds in, he got some good experience against a good hard man in Vasil Ducar, who, like I said, had been in there for some good names. And yeah, the future with Pat Brown looks pretty bright. He's 6-0, 6 KOs, 26 years of age. He's a big cruiserweight, big puncher, of course. His shot selection is really good. There are a few things I want to point out. Leaves his chin a little bit too high for my liking, and is a little bit too focused offensively. I feel like he's got the athleticism to be a little bit better defensively. One thing I noticed in this fight, it was in the 3rd round, he was leading with his jab very well in this fight and had a very authoritative jab. But in the 3rd round, he kind of, put his lead hand lower and was kind of only poking and prodding with the jab. And he was kind of poking and prodding with the jab the entire fight. But it was to kind of measure distance, and then he'd, put some more heat behind his jabs and then lead with punches from there. But he was kind of... what it was, he was baiting in Ducar to throw right hands, with the low lead hand. Except Ducar was actually landing those right hands. Pat Brown wasn't really able to get out of the way of them. It kind of looked like he was trying to just set up a knockout. It was a smart tactic, but it saw him get hit a bit too much for my liking, with the low lead hand. But after that round, he, got behind the jab. How he was in rounds 1 and 2, really nice jab, leading with it well. It was, like I said, authoritative, snappy, and was just the shot selection of Pat Brown has been incredibly impressive throughout his pro career. And I'd say, really, from the Lewis Oakford fight, you've kind of started to see the professional the professional polish really unveil itself. In the first 2 fights, it's kind of a transitionary period, but since the Lewis Oakford fight, I've really started to notice that kind of professional polish in Pat Brown, and in my opinion, he's starting to really hit his stride and look really, really good. Like I said, Vasil Ducar's a very tough man to stop. Hadn't really been dropped in before going into this fight. He has a very awkward defense. His chin's very low and his hands are very high. Most of the straight shots are going to bounce off the forehead. Most of the looping shots are going to bounce off the top of his head. He's a very awkward man to stop, and it's good to see. He dropped him with some body shots. It's good to see that from a young fighter in Pat Brown, who's, in the amateurs, body shots are not really valued as much as headshots. So it's good to see a young, really good amateur make the transition, and within a year be kind of known for his body punches. And one of the best combinations Pat Brown got, and it kind of relates back to my point about his shot selection, is a left hook to the head and left hook to the body. That's a very unorthodox combination, you know. Usually if you are going to see a combination similar to that, it's a left hook to the body, left hook to the head. But no, he likes to do it the other way around. He does it both ways, but that's the kind of what I've noticed. And yeah, man, they're pushing him quickly. You know, this was a 10-rounder. His last two fights have been booked to be 10 rounds. He went 8, went 2 the time before. Has secured 2 impressive victories. I'd say it's time for a bit of a step up for him. I was honestly thinking when the fight ended, I wouldn't mind a Chev Clark fight. You know, I think the Mosqueras of the world are a little bit too high up. But I'd kind of like to see him, dip his toes into the British scene a little bit, and compete up there. So like the likes of Vidal Riley, I think obviously Vidal Riley is the British champion, but he's fighting for the European title against Mastianek, of course, tonight on the Chisora Wild undercard. So I feel like the likes of Vidal Riley are a little bit too much of a step up. I think Vidal Riley is going to be in the world scene very, very soon. But a Chev Clark type opponent, I thought, yeah, why not? Chev Clark, of course, 11-2, pretty record. Lost 2 in a row to Mosquera, who's a very good fighter, and Vidal Riley, who's a very good fighter. His next performance after that, in my opinion, wasn't too great against Anthony Holloway. I don't believe Chev Clark is a world beater by any stretch of the imagination. He is 35 years of age, but I think the smart fight to do next is probably the John Hedges fight, right? That was a fight that was booked. It'd be for an English title. I don't rate John Hedges particularly highly. I think there's a lot of flaws there that Pat Brown in particular could exploit. I'd definitely be picking Pat Brown to stop John Hedges, but John Hedges is a decent fighter. He's got an English title to his name, and why not? You can still move Pat Brown quickly, but have him collect the more traditional titles like the English, like the British, like the European. You can kind of maybe go from the English title straight to the British, or maybe him and John Hedges could be for the vacant British title if Vidal Riley vacates after he wins the European, or when his next fight gets booked or whatever. But that's the fight I'd like to see next. Pat Brown versus John Hedges. Yeah, that sounds like a good fight to me. And yeah, there's definitely some work to be done with Pat Brown. I'd like to see him get that chin lower. I'd just like to see the defense be a little bit sharp, like just a little sharper with the defense, a little cuter. But when you are as offensively gifted as Pat Brown, I get why the defense might suffer at times. But in these weight classes, cruiserweight and heavyweight, which I assume he'll be at heavyweight one day, you just like to see good defensive fighters, don't you? Because one punch can change it all. Yeah, man. Let's see where he goes from here. I think there's a world class prospect in there. I just think you got to build him right, and he's just got to work on a few things, and he's right there. So yeah, let's see how it goes for Jermaine Franklin. Jermaine Franklin. What the fuck if I just said Jermaine Franklin? I meant Pat Brown. That's fucking weird. Yeah, for Pat Brown. But yeah, thanks for watching. Goodbye.